Okay, guys, when you look at supply of labor, individual supply of labor basically means we're looking at individual worker. If you look at individual worker, right, and if you ask him what are the two options available for individual workers, the answer to this will be he has two options, either to work or which is basically, you know, supply labor, supply labor, or he might have the second option, which is not to work, then he might be demanding leisure. You know, the fact that you're not working, you might be then deciding to demand leisure. Now, why am I saying demanding leisure? Because, like, do you actually buy leisure? Is there a market for leisure? And the answer is no, there's no market for leisure. But there is one thing for sure, leisure is not free. Why is leisure not free? Because we say there is what we call an opportunity cost. you know there is an opportunity cost of leisure. What is the opportunity cost of leisure, guys? Can you guys tell me what do you lose out if you don't demand, if you decide to demand leisure? What do you lose out? What's the opportunity cost? Any ideas? Any guesses? You're earning, good job, which means wage rate is your, Hunain, good job, wage rate is your opportunity cost. Isn't that true? The wage that you could have gotten is your opportunity cost. That's why it is what we call, it's not free. So if I decide to consume 1 hour of leisure, I could have spent that 1 hour working, which means I've lost 1 hour of wage rate. So let's say $20 your wage rate per hour. You've lost that wage rate by not working. Does that make sense? Are we good? Is that fine? So wage rate becomes your opportunity cost. Make sense, guys? Do you agree with me in this with this one? Yeah. So we also say this, by the way. Interestingly, we say that leisure is actually also a normal good. We actually, in economics, we classify it as a normal good, which means as your income go up, you may demand more of that good. So not only it's a consumption good, which means say that it when you consume that good, it gives you some satisfaction. There is a price of it, which means it's not free. The price is your wage rate, and also it's normal in nature, which means when your income go up, your demand goes up. Now, why is this important to understand? Because whenever you decide to, like, should I supply my labor or not, or should I, this question will come back to us, whether how important for you leisure is. Make sense? Are we good to move on, guys? Does this concept, and do we understand this concept of leisure? Yeah, are we good to move on? Okay, moving on, guys. The next thing we talk about is, if you look at leisure, guys, if you look at leisure, guys, an important thing to understand is this, that whenever your wage rate changes, right, whenever there's a change in wage rate, will you be working more or not depends on your, also basically wage will depend on, let me just write this, wage rate um, effect will have what we call, and in other words, change in wage rate will have what we call income effect and substitution effect. Just like price effect is equal to income effect or substitution effect, even a change in wage rate will have substitution effect and income effect. So substitution effect, if you remember, substitution effect was simply from a product market. When we used to do substitution effect, we used to say when the price of a good goes up, you will buy less of it because it is more expensive than the substitute. Remember substitution effect in the product market? Or when the price goes down, you buy more of it because it becomes cheaper than a substitute. Income effect is to say this: when the price of a good goes down, for example, then you will probably going to buy more of it because your real income is increasing, right? So income effect used to look at how changes, and therefore when your wage changes, your income may change, and that's why you may decide to act differently. While substitution effect will say this, that if your wage changes, will it become more will something become more expensive or not? Or will the substitute? So right now we know this, that what's the substitute to working? What's the substitute to working, guys? Or what's the substitute to quantity supplied? Anyone? What's the substitute to quantity supplied? Leisure. Good job. So leisure is my substitute, right? And the price of leisure we need to understand also. Price is your wage rate. Okay, so that's something which we need to quickly talk about now. So guys, what is the substitution effect of wage increase versus substitution income effect? Let's talk about this. And remember this, that we are saying that these two effects, they happen simultaneously. The wage rate effect is made up of substitution effect and income effect. So substitution effect simply says this. Substitution effect simply says this, that when the wage rate goes up, guys, when the wage rate goes up, can I say this, that the uh, leisure becomes more expensive? Remember, because what is leisure? What is leisure? Leisure is, what's the price of leisure? And we said this price of leisure is wage rate, right? So when wage rate goes up, can I say this leisure becomes more expensive, right? It becomes more expensive. And if leisure becomes more expensive, what will you do, guys? Will you demand more leisure, or will you work more? Anyone? Work more. Good job. So we will work more, which would mean quantity of labor supplied will go up. Isn't that true? And in other words, what we can say is this: if the quantity of labor supplied is going up, what we are going to say therefore is this, that the demand, in other words, the demand for leisure will fall. Isn't that true? So in other words, when your wage rate goes up, our substitution effect says work more. Do you all agree with me? So substitution effect will say work more. Yeah, Afia and everyone else. So we do agree with the idea. So let me write this. Substitution effect says when the wage rate goes up, we should work more, right? What does income effect says? Income effect says this. Wait a minute, guys. Income effect would say, okay, hey, wage rate goes up. This is a normal good, since leisure is normal good. हमने कहा था ना, normal is normal in nature. We said that, right? It's normal good. Then that would mean what? If wage income effect therefore would say this, that if the wage rate goes up, since leisure is a normal good, you should demand more of the good. Demand for leisure should go up or must go up, right? Which means because you normal, it's a normal good, and since since the wage rate is going up, you will be like, I don't need to work for 5 hours. I may need to only work for 4 hours or 3 hours or whatever the case is, and therefore quantity of labor supplied must go down. Why? Because if you're demanding more leisure, this means you're working less. So this should say when the wage rate goes up, we must work less. Do you all agree with the income effect, guys? So substitution effect is saying work more, right? Substitution effect is saying work more, while income effect is saying work less. My question to you guys is, what should we do? Should we work more or work less when the wage rate goes up? And the answer to this one is that it depends on what wage you are earning. But before I talk about that, guys, are we happy with the income effect and substitution effect? Are we happy about the income and substitution effect? Yeah. So guys, what we say is that when you use this analysis, and if you look at your supply for labor, your supply curve for labor, and this is by the way individual worker. When you look at individual worker, and I put your wage rate here and quantity of labor here on the other side, my supply curve will look like this. It will rise and then it starts to fall. Okay, so this is how my supply curve will look like. Okay, why is that so? And I want to talk about this. Let's call this wage to be W star. Before W star, guys, what is happening? Your wage is going up, right? So is your number of hours worked. Basically, when your wages are low, one person, if I'm earning wages and my wages are low, can I say this? When the wage rate goes up, I will probably work more, which means substitution effect will be greater than income effect. Why is that so? Because as the wage rate goes up, remember when I'm not that rich and I'm somebody who, and I can sort of relate to it completely, because there was a time when I was, for example, starting out teaching economics. I used to teach in schools, I used to give tuitions, and I used to have a very, very long day. My day would end at 9 p.m. or something like that. My teaching day would end at 9 p.m. It would start at 8 a.m., it would end at 9 p.m. So as my wage was going up, I was working more and more and more. Now, if you ask me, how many hours do you teach? And my answer is I teach for 6 hours, and that too is basically cumbersome for me. It's pretty high workload for me. So what I'm trying to say, guys, is that when the wage rate goes up, there comes a point when people start to cut down the number of hours they're working. After a certain wage rate, they would cut down the number of hours they're working. And that basically means my income effect will become greater than my substitution effect. Because income effect says work less, substitution effect says work more. And if the wage goes up, you are working less than before. This means income effect must be more powerful. So what we say, guys, is this, that here SE outweighs IE, and on the other hand here IE outweighs SE. So from an individual perspective, this is what we call, the name of this curve is called the backward bending supply of labor. You get that? Does that make sense? So it's a backward bending supply of labor. Any questions, guys? Do we get the idea of the individual supply of labor and backward bending supply of labor? Are we good? Are we sorted? Awesome, guys. Are we good to move on? Are we good to move on, everyone? Zamin or anyone else who has a question? Afia? Today, the normal. Okay, awesome. So people are super quiet today. I don't know why, but I'm just going to take that as a yes, and I'm going to move on. Okay, guys. So we're done with income substitution effect. We're done with the backward bending supply of labor. But from this, basically, if I want to sort of market supply, sort of typically we say that when the wage goes up, we will see people to work more. Quantity supply should go up. Okay, and that's why normally when you look at market supply from this, for any, so market supply will also be the horizontal summation of individual individual workers supply curves. So keep on adding individual worker supply curves and you will get your market supply curve. Okay. Now let's talk about a very important discussion, which is the next part of the discussion that I'm going to skip the industry supply. It's actually not that relevant, honestly speaking. And I'm going to discuss some of these features later on. So I'm going to skip this part, but I'm going to talk about, elasticity of supply of labor. That's an important discussion. And I want to spend some time here because we're going to use this for our class later on. So, what exactly do we mean by elasticity of supply of labor? So, elasticity of supply of labor is basically going to be percentage change in quantity supplied over percentage change in wage rate. In other words, we know this, guys, that when the wage rate changes, you know, when the wage rate goes up, we know quantity supply should go up. But the question is, by how much? By how much will the quantity supply go up? If it's going up by much more, we will say, or if percentage change in quantity supplied is more than percentage change in wage rate, we'll call it elastic. you know we will call that elastic, versus if it's less, we'll call it inelastic. So for example, if it's like less, we will call it inelastic. So what will make labor to be more responsive versus less responsive? Remember, now we're looking at from a worker's perspective. Okay, we're looking at from the worker's perspective. We assume that workers should respond, but how easy or difficult it is for workers to respond to change in wage rate? Will they? What are the factors that make them respond much more quickly versus less quickly? Got it. So let's talk about this. So first thing first is this, that with respect to the change in wage rate, your elasticity will be greater, or your elasticity will be greater the higher the level of unemployment in the country or in the industry. If, for example, there are more people unemployed in the industry, so when there are more people, UE means unemployment. So when there's a high unemployment would mean kind of like spare capacity, right? There are lot more people available, and if there is spare capacity, of course, then easily quantity supplied can go up. But if there is full employment, you know, if there is full employment, therefore your quantity supplied cannot change. Isn't that true? And if that is the case, then your elasticity supply will be low. So if there is high unemployment, you will agree with me that supply will be very elastic. Isn't that true? Do we get that? Are we happy with the first point? Are we happy with the first point? I'm going to come to your point, Hunan, in 1 minute. That's a very good point that you've raised, the skill of workers. But let's wait for it 1 minute. The second point that I want to raise is number two, is the more occupationally and geographically mobile the labor force is. If labor force is more occupationally and geographically mobile, you know, like for example, it can go from one occupation to another. For example, we gave an example of a teacher like Sir Salman. Sir Salman, if you know Sir Salman, he's occupationally pretty mobile between psychology and business studies because he can teach both the subjects. So the more occupationally mobile workers are, they can move from one occupation to another. The easily supply can be increased, because if ever there's a shortage somewhere, you can easily fill in and employ more workers, right? Similarly, guys, the more geographically mobile labor forces, like if the labor force is very geographically mobile, that is also an advantage, because if for example, suddenly if labor force can go from Lahore to Karachi to Islamabad or to Balochistan or whatever, then this would mean if you can easily increase supply. Okay, so the second factor is about how easy it is for us to move labor from one occupation to another, or from one region to another. Third one is basically the training period. If the training period is very small, like for example, let's say to make an economics teacher, I just need to make him sort of go through trainings in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that would mean supply will be very, very elastic. But if the training period is long, that would mean your supply will be inelastic. Make sense? And this is where I will come back to Hunan's point, which is basically longer training periods basically are also associated with jobs or qualifications that are more technical or difficult. So the lower the qualification and skills required, for example, like janitors, not very much skill required, it's going to be very elastic supply versus like doctors, it's going to be inelastic supply. Why is it inelastic? Well, number one, the training period is much longer. For a surgeon, for example, you got to go through many trainings. Number one, and this qualification skills required is also a lot more, and that's why your demand supply will be very inelastic. Lastly, guys, it's about like time period under consideration, because if there is a long run versus short run, in long run we know this supply will be more elastic. Why? Because you can easily train workers, you can educate them, and so on and so forth. But in the short run, supply will be what you call inelastic. Why? Because it's not easy to for us to train workers, and so on and so forth. Make sense? So this becomes an important point. So longer the time period under consideration, the more elastic will be supply, and vice versa. Shorter the time period under consideration, more inelastic will be supply. Make sense, guys? Any questions? Are we going to move on? Okay, guys. Next topic that I want to talk about is a new topic within this discussion, and I feel that we have some time, so I want to quickly talk about this. It has to do with elasticity of supply. So whenever you look at anyone's wage, okay, whenever you look at anyone's wage, for example, this wage we say is made up of two things: economic rent and transfer earnings. So ER for economic rent and TE for transfer earning. We say this that wage of a person, whatever wage you pay me, will have economic rent and transfer earning. Transfer earning is simply the amount that you get, which is your opportunity cost. Like if you, for example, look at my earning, the earning that I get, for example, for teaching economics, let's say, includes basically some amount of money, which is the opportunity cost, which is the minimum payment for me or for the worker to to stay in the business. So the minimum payment you want to pay for me to stay in the business. For example, if you want me to keep on teaching economics, there is a minimum payment you will pay me to make me stay, and that minimum payment is basically equal to my opportunity cost. So, for example, if I don't teach economics, right, my next best alternative, whatever the next best alternative it is. So let's say if you're giving me, let's say, 100,000 of dollars of salary. That's a nice salary to have. But let's say $100,000 of salary, for example, you're giving me per annum. And if you ask me what's the next best alternative, if you were not a teacher, for example, what's the next best alternative for you? And I would have said, hey, I would have been working in a bank because that was what I was doing before I joined teaching. And let's say, how much will you get if you decide to quit teaching? And let's say I say $60,000. So for me, $60,000 is the what you call transfer earning. If I don't teach today, and if I uh, end up basically getting into banking, then my transfer earning will be the next best alternatives money that I'll get, which is $60,000. But then you are paying me over and above $60,000. You're paying me some kind of a premium as that. What is that premium, guys? We say this premium is what we call our uh, economic rent, which is basically in this example of mine. In this example of mine is $40,000. This $40,000 basically is the amount that I get over and above my transfer earning, and we call it economic rent. It's like producer, it's like producer surplus, right? So one part of my salary is my uh, transfer earnings, which is basically the minimum that I need to get in order for me to stay as a teacher. But then because I've been teaching for such a long time, you'll be like, Sir Ali is better than, for example, let's say a new teacher. And therefore, there is a little premium that I get over and above the minimum payment, which is kind of like my producer surplus, which is economic rent. So economic rent is basically something that you get because you are better than many other people out there. Probably it's a premium you get that is making you basically, could be because you have more experience, could be because you have more skills, and whatever the reason that you want to pay a premium to a guy which is probably someone who you like and his output you like. Make sense, guys? Are we good? Do we get the idea of economic rent versus transfer earning? So, what is the definition of economic rent? And the answer to economic rent is the payment, simply payment over and above the transfer earnings. Okay. So, whenever you look at an individual, some part of his payment will be economic rent, and some part of it will be transfer earning. So, that's what we are saying. Make sense, guys? Any questions? Okay, so I want to read this and then we could sort of continue this discussion tomorrow. But look at this. Economic rent is an income received by the owner of a factor over and above the amount required to induce that owner to offer the factor of use. Any factor of production can receive an economic rent. The income required to induce the supply of a factor is the transfer earning or the opportunity cost. So any payment over and above the opportunity cost or transfer earning is your economic rent. Make sense? So the economic rent is the value of the factor in its next best use. So for me, the next best use was giving me, let's say, $60,000, then my economic rent will be $40,000. Okay, I'm going to decide on that, Zamin, a little later. Are we good, guys?